Hi everyone, Dr. Remy here with my good friend, Dr. Peg Martinez, yoga instructor extraordinaire. And welcome to Pain Free and Fit's continuing exercise series. Today we have a great lineup for you. We're going to be going over the 5 biggest mistakes in yoga that you can make that will lead to pain and injury and how to avoid them. Enjoy. So, our first major mistake or mistakes occur during the bridge pose. Peg, would you like to explain that?
Right, so bridge pose, when I set up my class for this, I have them bring their heels in, tickle, and then back off a little bit. So that's about the placement of your feet. Then I have their arms down by their side. Softly press into the feet and lift the pelvis up. Now the problem is you're not poking your pelvis up. So you want to roll your shoulders underneath. If you can interlace your hands behind your back, that's great. If not, you're going to bring your arms down by your side. Roll the shoulders underneath, press strongly into the feet. Be mindful that your thighs are parallel, so you're not letting them point out towards your neighbor. And the focus here is opening up the heart. So I'm going to puff my heart up and open my throat. So here we have skull loops, so we're not compressing the chin. The chin is up, the throat is open, the neck is supple, and I'm pressing strongly into my feet and my wrists.
So can you explain that heart up? Because I think a lot of people don't understand that it's coming from the chest. You're trying to bring the mid back.
A lot of people think it's coming from the pelvis and they poke their pelvis up towards the ceiling. And it's really about the heart center reaching up and the pressure on the shoulders and the throat open and the feet being equally weighted.
That's great for a lot of people's shoulder and neck pain, because with all our forward rounded shoulder posture, trying to extend that mid back is huge, and this is a great strengthening and flexibility exercise to do that. One of the things that I find also is that people will not have their kneecaps aligned with their feet. That puts a lot of rotational stress on the knee and can irritate meniscus problems and patellofemoral disorders. So you always want to make sure your kneecap faces the same angle that your feet do. And you want to make sure you're engaging your glutes or buttock muscles, because those with tight hip flexors, which is a lot of people suffering from low back and hip pain, will many times in this pose not recruit the glutes, and the hip will not be centered in the socket. The actual thigh bone will move forward. So by squeezing the buttock and thinking of a backwards pressure with the side of your hip in the socket, that'll help to maintain the proper central position of the hip and help to relax and stretch the hip flexors, which are so often tight due to prolonged sitting, and that can really help with back pain and hip pain. That's a great pose. So pose number 2 is the classic down dog, which is responsible for a lot of hip and lower back problems, herniating people's discs because they don't have proper spine stability. So Peg, would you like to go over down dog?
First, we're just going to start with just hands and knees, just to review what's happening with the pelvis. So do a nice big archy back and then do a fluffy back. So we have to be somewhere in between. So if I arch the back too much, there's a lot of pressure. And if I tuck my tailbone too much, that's an issue. So I'm going to let my back arch, let the belly drop, and then I'm going to lengthen my tailbone just a little bit and pause. So that's a good place to be for the low back.
Neutral posture. So you're basically halfway in between too much of an arch, which may cause discomfort, and an over rounding, which may cause discomfort. You want to be right between those two extremes. That's the safest position for your lower back. Additionally, you want to make sure that you're not having any rotational twists of the pelvis or any leaning sideways. If you're not sure about that, I invite you to go to the Pain Free and Fit website. There's a body analysis there that you can do on yourself and see if any of these typical posture alignment issues apply to you, because that's something you want to know, you want to get down and avoid before you even get into your first pose.
So let's say you want to try getting into downward dog. So I'm going to have you start sitting back. They sometimes call this extended child or seal pose. So I got good contact with my hands on my mat. My pinky's about at the edge of the mat. Crease of the wrist is parallel. Really good contact with my hands. arms are straight. It almost looks like I'm ready to take off. My toes are tucked under. I'm gonna press strongly into my palms. I'm gonna think of fluffing or floating my hips up. Now I'm not worried about getting my heels down, so if you have tight calves, probably your heels won't go down. So I invite people to bend their knees and really work on getting the side body long. Because most people in their down dogs, they have a very boxy pose and they're kind of like this. There's a lot of pressure on the shoulders. So if you just bend your knees, press, lengthen the tailbone slightly, you're going to have a much longer side body. Your neck will be more relaxed, and then you can work on growing the leg bones long to get your heels down to the floor. Now the second problem here is the shoulders. This is a tough one. So most people let their elbows point out to the side, they lose their necks. So you want to spin those inner arms in. Think of getting all the creases out of your neck and shoulder area and broadening the shoulders. Think of the shoulder blades closest to your ears getting wider apart and the tips of your shoulder blades coming closer together. And also think that your shoulder blades don't like your ears. They want to pull away from your ears. Your neck is nice and relaxed. And again, if you have an issue with the hamstrings or pain in your low back, you can always soften those knees and hold your down dog. No one said you had straight legs in your downward facing dog.
This is great because you're keeping a perfectly neutral spine, that same mid position between too much of an arch and not enough that you had at the beginning, and you're allowing the entire stretch or motion to come from your major joint, the hip joint. And that allows the low back to be protected. And the shoulder points that Dr. Peg was mentioning are perfect for so many of our problems, such as rounded shoulders, internal humeral rotation at the shoulder joint. She's got her neck in good position, her scapula or shoulder blades in good position. This is supporting good posture, stretching the often tight hamstrings and calves, and that's taking pressure off the low back. Great pose to do if you're doing it right. Remember, we always want to strengthen proper function, not dysfunction. Mistake number 3 is mountain pose going into a forward bend. Peg?
So when you start your yoga practice, a lot of times you'll start in Tadasana or mountain pose. And that's your standard position. A lot of yoga classes start in. So I cue my class to start with either the feet slightly apart or together. Doesn't really matter. Sometimes it's more stable to have the feet apart. We have the 4 corners of the feet. Sometimes they say the 4 tires of a car. I like to lift the toes, really feel the arches engage, relax the toes down, and really find the 4 edges or 4 corners of your feet.
2 back corners of the heel, 2 corners of the forefoot.
So classic hip, knee, ankle, you want those to line up. We engage muscle energy. So we're hugging in towards that midline. We're lifting up on those kneecaps. We get up to the pelvic rim, and a lot of times you'll see people with a big archy back, or they poke their pubic bone
Sway
forward.
back posture.
So we want the pelvic rim nice and level. So we lift up on the navel and we lengthen the tailbone equally. We come up to the shoulders. We lift softly and let the shoulder blades float down the back. Check in with those front ribs again, because inevitably what happens, people roll the shoulders and they do this again. So we lift the shoulders, we check in with those front ribs that they're hugging in. And the last thing is we have this wonderful head we have to deal with. So a lot of times we have a forward head carriage. So we want to get the palate back. So I tell the class to take the tops of the ears and press the tops of the ears back. So hopefully the opening of your ear canal will line up with the edges of your shoulders. And your chin is parallel to the floor. So it's not here and it's not tucking too much. So palate back. And we're hugging in, and then we soften just ever so slightly, balancing between hugging in and softening.
What a great standing posture.
Okay, so we're going to go right into a forward bend from there. So a lot of times you're told to inhale, and then your exhale folding forward. Now what happens? We want to touch the floor, and we do this. We do all sorts of crazy things to touch that floor. So I like to tell my students, bring their hands to the hips, inhale a breath, hinging at the hips, pause. Be very aware of this alignment in the low back and the shoulder blades on the back, and maybe hinge a little bit more. So let's say you have really tight hamstrings and you can't reach that floor and you're trying and you're losing your shoulders. If you have a block, there's something you can rest on. Keep the shoulder blades on the back. Keep this alignment with the hip, knee, and the ankle, and then you can melt the heart down. Another classic thing you'll see, people will let their hips fall back. Oh, look, I can touch the floor now. But my hip is all the way in the back room. I need to get my hip, knee, and ankle to line up. Weight comes more forward on the ball mounds of my feet, and then I have much better alignment.
That's keeping your legs perpendicular to the floor, which is great. It's decreasing the stress on the hamstring. It's not being pulled as much, and she's still making sure her motion is primarily at the hip joint, a little bit in the mid-back, but that low back is stable. That's the way to bend forward without hurting those low backs.
The last thing we're going to throw in is the shoulders, because a lot of people want to touch the floor so bad, they do this and they lose their shoulders. So you want to keep the shoulder blades on the back. If that means you can't touch the floor, you can hold on to your shins or use a block. That frees up the neck. My neck is nice and supple. I can let the crown of my head reach towards the floor. If you're able to touch the floor rather than just collapsing, I like to have intent in those fingertips, little spider hands that really gets you aware of where the shoulder blades are on the back, and then you can let the head release down.
What a great position of scapular stability. Most people have those rounded and elevated shoulders, and this is look at how easy that is for students to mess up by letting those shoulders fall towards the ears. She's keeping them down and retracted. That's building all the strength and stability for her shoulders, taking pressure up the shoulder joint and the neck all in one. Mistake number 4. The triangle pose. That's a huge one for lateral and rotational, as well as A to P or sagittal stability.
There's so much going on with triangle, and it's a classic yoga pose. Pretty much every yoga class does it, but there's a lot going on. You get a lot to cover. So I usually start class with just an expanded leg stretch start. So I have nice strong legs, my toes are pointing forward. Then we have to address what's happening with the legs. So I'm going to start with my back leg. I'm going to carve that heel away. It's almost like I got a gum on my heel. Carving that leg away, so I have inner spiral.
And that's so tough. If I could just interrupt for a second, that's so tough and important for people with those chronic external hip rotations, people that stand and walk with their legs out, because this is stretching the tight external rotators, waking up the internal rotators, and it's essential for bringing good posture back to the hip.
So then I'm going to look at my front foot, and I'm going to pivot, and that's external rotation or outer spiral. So now my toes are going to be pointing straight ahead. And then I look at my alignment of my feet. So it's about heel to arch to heel to heel. The next thing I'm going to do is put on our energy tights. I'm going to lift up on those kneecaps so I have really strong stability. And then the pelvis. Most people do this. So we want to get that pelvic rim level. So I have my students play. Here's not good, good. So hips are level. They can be on an angle, but they're level. Now the next phase for triangles, people want to go down and touch the floor. They do this, and they make this C curve here. Well, we want to keep the side body long. So I'm going to have you bring your hands to that heart, open out from there, and long waist. Now I don't care about touching the floor. I want to keep this nice and long. So I could use a block. I could tap my shin. I even have students press into the shin, and that brings awareness to really lengthen that bottom waist.
So huge for hip hiking. So many people have a tendency to bring one hip up, lean to the side. That's just compressing the lower back, compressing the abs, leading to all kinds of lower back and hip injury.
So we now have to address what's happening with the arms. So they usually teach you arms stacked on top of each other. If your shoulders are tight, this can be challenging because you might let your heart drop forward. Another thing that students do is they let that arm fall behind them. So I say blow a kiss up towards the ceiling and see your thumb line up right over your mouth. Now, another thing that happens is this head. And we tend to drop our ear to our shoulder, and that just feels nasty on the neck. So you want to look straight ahead. Remember what we did with pressing the back of our skull back. press the back of the skull back, and then that gives you the freedom to look up towards that thumb without having compression in the cervical spine. The last thing that people do, because they want to touch the floor, is they do this, and they let their tushy fall to that back wall. What you really want to be aware of is carving that cheek under, and that means coming up a little bit higher on the shin or using a block. Much better form. Press the back of the skull back to find a little more extension in the pose for Trikonasana.
That is great stability. She has a equal distance between her ribs and hips on both sides. She has an equal distance between her shoulder blades and ears, and she kept the spine stable by drawing the head back first before she rotated, which is an essential part of so many people's neck pain. They turn their head without first making it stable by drawing it back and keeping the shoulder blades level. Great pose to avoid a lot of trouble. And mistake number 5, the simple seated twist. Peg?
Okay, so we're starting with our legs on the floor. We can press one foot over the other, and the first mistake people make is their pelvis isn't on the floor, so they let that cheek hike up. So you want to get your pelvis on the floor, so equally weighted through the pelvic area. I like to cue in with the foot on the floor. Not always possible if you have ankle issues or knee issues. You might have to soften that a little bit, but we are working on getting that foot to the floor. So key things is first lengthening the spine, rooting down, and then twisting. So let's say I'm going to be twisting to this side. I'm going to lengthen the opposite side. Inhale. Exhale, bring my elbow to the knee, and then pause and regroup and see what my alignment is. My sitting bones are down. My twists always start from the bottom up. So I'm going to inhale, lengthen, exhale, and twist. And at the end, I can use my gaze to peek over the shoulder. And that brings me to the next thing. Everyone's thinking about that shoulder in the back. Well, let's get that shoulder blade on the back. We forget about this poor guy over here, and we let it collapse. So we want to keep both shoulder blades on the back. Skull is still back. I'm inhaling, and when I exhale, I can always deepen that twist. So once we're here, we hold for a few breaths. I like to end it by doing a turn, and I just release in the opposite direction, and it feels divine to finally kind of unrevolve in the opposite direction.
Symmetry, which is huge for improving balance in the musculoskeletal system and preventing injury. You notice this one has a lot of rotation at multiple joints. As Peg was turning, if you notice, the low back is not really designed for a lot of twisting. Even though she's moving from her very base where she's sitting and up, most of the rotation or twist is coming from her mid-back and neck. Her belly button is relatively still straight forward, not trying to overdo that stretch in the back to hurt it. Her knee also, many people have rotational problems in the knee where the shin bone is turned in or out. She could, if she starts to feel some knee discomfort, she could lessen that angle so the knee and the toe is a little bit more on the same angle. Also, when she's coming across here, her hip on this side, if she's not pushing that down into the socket, right, decreasing or compressing the length from her knee to her hip, it's going to invite the hip to slip forward, and that many times creates groin and hip pain on that side. So always make sure you use that bottom glute to bring that leg back and down. And the other thing that she mentioned that was great was that shoulder posture. So many times when we're twisting, we're trying to twist with the scapula all the way across, and we're preventing that motion from happening in our mid-back. And that's a big problem with recurrent shoulder and neck pain. We don't have enough motion in that mid-back and where the neck meets the mid-back. So it's great to keep those shoulders back and emphasize that rotation in the mid-back and the neck. So if you practice these 5 tips or multiple tips on 5 different poses, I think you're going to have a lot more pain relief and a lot better results from your yoga poses. Peg?
Happy yoga. Enjoy.
Enjoy. We'll see you next time.